In the last video, we looked at expansionary fiscal policy, and we said if we need to increase aggregate demand to bring us to our full employment level of real GDP, that the government could increase spending or decrease taxes, which would increase consumption, and it would bring us to our full employment level of real GDP by increasing aggregate demand and bringing us to $8 trillion. So right now we are in a $500 billion recessionary gap. And through expansionary policy, the government is going to be able to help get us out. Hopefully. Okay, so expansionary policy. Oops. Okay. Through expansionary policy, we can see that we could increase aggregate demand through an increase in government spending or a decrease in taxes. And you can go back and watch the previous video if you don't know how we got to these. Okay, a decrease in taxes. So how much money is the government going to have to put in the economy if they choose to use government spending? How much in taxes would they have to put in the economy if they chose to lessen taxes? How much would they have to reduce taxes by? $500 million, same thing for government spending? No, we'll actually see that there's a multiplied effect in the economy about how one person's consumption becomes another person's income. So let's say that we're going to look at, let's say that the government decides to give an additional $10,000 to the economy. Let's say that they find 5 families and give each family $2,000. Well, what are these people going to do with this additional income? Well, part of it is going to go to consumption, and part of it is going to go to spending. How much is going to go to consumption? Well, in the video on the marginal propensity to consume, we found out that roughly in the United States we have a savings rate of somewhere significantly less than 10%. But I'm going to say that let's pretend that we have a savings rate of 20% and our MPS is 0.2 and our MPC is 0.8. Okay, you can go back and watch those videos if you don't remember the marginal propensity to consume and the marginal propensity to save. But this means that those 5 families that each got 2 additional $1,000, that collectively they'll spend $8,000 and they'll save $2,000. Okay, so what did they spend that $8,000 on? Maybe some of it went to repaint someone's house. Maybe somebody hired a painter and they paid them $1,500 to repaint their house. Or maybe somebody bought a $2,000 vehicle. Collectively, each person had $2,000 to spend. So where does that money go now? Does it just stop? Does the painter that got the $1,500 to paint one of those first 5 families' house, does he just hold on to that money forever? Does he save it? No, we see that $2,000 is now his income. So that $8,000 cycles back into the income portion of the economy. So one person's spending becomes another person's income. So now different people hold on to this $8,000 in the form of income. And again, we'll see that 20% will be siphoned off into savings. So 20% would be $1,600 will go into savings. And then the rest will be spent, which would be $6,400. Okay, so this would be the first round. This would be the second round. Let's look at the third round. So the third round is going to start with this $6,400 that was the previous round's consumption. That becomes now the next round of people. This is their income. And again, they're going to save part and consume part. So the next round of consumption is going to be $5,120 for consumption. And their savings is going to be $1,280. So then this $5,120 is going to come over to start the fourth round. 5120. So this is the next round of people. This is their income that they got from this original $10,000 that the government put into the economy. 5 rounds of spending later, it's still about half as large as it was going through. So we'll do one more round after this. So $4,096 goes into the next round of consumption, and $1,024 was siphoned off. So the 5th round, we'll just see what it starts with. The 5th round would start with $4,096. Okay, so let's look at one single example. Let's say there were 5 people, and they all got $2,000 from the government. And Sally decided to spend her $2,000. She's not a saver. She actually didn't save any of it. She spent it all and bought a car from Joe. Joe now has an additional $2,000. So Sally was one of this first $10,000 recipients. She got $2,000 of it. She didn't save any. She put her $2,000 towards a new car. So that $2,000 went into Joe's pocket. Joe now has $2,000. He, along with other people, have the second round of consumption. So Joe's going to spend some and save some. Whoever Joe pays his portion of that money to is going to go towards the third round, okay? And that's how it's going to go throughout the economy. So after just 5 rounds of consumption, if we were to add this up after 5 rounds of consumption, we would see that the total dollar amount would be $33,166. I'm sorry, $616. So $33,616 were created from this initial $10,000 investment in the economy that the government produced. So that means if we back out that $10,000, so this is total spending. Actually, let's call that total income instead of spending. That's total income. Okay, and it includes that original $10,000. So that means if we back that out, that there was still $23,616 of new consumption. I was just taking it 50 rounds really fast. There's $23,000 that was new consumption. So that's just after 5 rounds. If we actually took this to 50 rounds, okay, that 33,000 becomes 50,000. Okay, that 33,000 becomes $50,000 of consumption. I did it over here in Microsoft really fast, and you can see right here after 50 rounds, and it keeps going, but after 50 rounds right there, we have that it's $50,000. So that means that it's $40,000 of new consumption. Now, as you can see, that this is one of the functions that is increasing at a decreasing rate. Each round has a positive number going forward, so that means that we're adding to it, but it's being added at a smaller rate. So it's almost like a snowball. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but the amount that we're adding each time isn't as large as it was the last time. So after 50 rounds, with the marginal propensity to save of 0.2, we have that $10,000 become $50,000. If we were to look at it with a marginal propensity to save of 0.1, we would see that this number would be twice as large. Okay, so let's go ahead and work on what we call the basic spending multiplier. So this is the multiplied effect, but now let me show you guys the basic spending multiplier. So if we take the basic spending multiplier, it's an R, multiplier. Okay, if we were to take the basic spending multiplier, we're going to call that little m. little m is equal to 1 over the marginal propensity to save. Okay, so that means in the last example we looked at, little m would be equal to 1 over 0.20. Now, if you take 1 and you divide it by 0.20, you will end up with 5. So our little m is going to be 5. Okay, and that obviously changes based on what the marginal propensity to save is. If you look at 1 over 0.10, if the marginal propensity to save is equal to 10, so this example, the MPS is equal to 0.2, this example, the MPS is equal to 0.1, now the multiplied effect is going to be 10 times. Anything that we put into the market, it's going to be 10 times as great when it's finished going through the multiplied effect. Anything that we put into the market here with when we're taking 20% out in savings, it's going to be 5 times as large as what we put in when it's done going through the economy. So now let's get back to our basic spending multiplier and figuring out what is the change in government spending. Well, let's look at the formula that we want to use is let's look at the size of the gap, whether it's a recessionary gap or an inflationary gap, the size of the gap, and if we divide that through by little m, we will end up with a $50 billion recessionary gap divided through by little m. In this case, we find out that little m was 5. So the amount of money that the United States government would have to put into the economy would be $100 billion. And that money would ultimately create $500 billion of spending as it works through the economy. Okay, so that's going to take some time, obviously, but if they put anything more than $100 billion by the time that the multiplied effect is finished, we would have some sort of an inflationary gap, ceteris paribus. Okay, so now if we're going to look at, so that's the formula that we want to use. In order to find out what we need to change aggregate demand by, we want to look at the size of the gap and then divide through by little m if we're using the government spending one. If we're using the tax multiplier is very similar to the government spending multiplier. However, the tax multiplier takes a little bit longer to work. If you're trying to increase people's income, in order to increase consumption down here in aggregate demand, then you're going to have to lower taxes. But it's going to take a little bit of time for them to realize that their income has gone up. Okay, it's going to take them a little bit of time for their disposable income to increase. And also, they need to believe that that tax break is permanent. Otherwise, they're not going to spend the money. They're going to save that money because they're going to have to pay higher taxes possibly next year. Okay, so assuming that people believe that the tax break is in fact permanent, then if we want to use the tax multiplier, we're going to take the size of the gap again, and instead of dividing through just simply by little m, we're going to take the negative of little m minus 1, okay? The reason that it's a negative is because if we want to increase aggregate demand, if we want aggregate demand to increase, we would have to decrease taxes. Okay, so these two things work in opposite directions. If we want aggregate demand to go down, then we would have to increase taxes. So obviously, it needs to be the opposite of what we're trying to do. So here we would have to decrease taxes. How much do we have to decrease taxes by? Well, we're going to take that $50 billion and divide through by negative, and then 5 minus 1 would be 4. So that means that it looks like that we're going to have to, oh shoot. Just kidding. We're going to have to, I just wanted to change that equals, I wanted to move it over here to that we're going to have to decrease taxes by $125 billion in order to bring us $500 billion of new consumption spending. Okay, so the bottom line is this is how much, if we're looking at using government spending, we would have to increase it by, and this is how much we would have to decrease taxes by if we were looking at trying to decrease taxes in order to increase consumption. So this is obviously expansionary policy. The exact same thing is true for contractionary policy, except for with contractionary policy, we would be decreasing government spending, okay? So we'd look at how much we needed to decrease government spending by, and then over here, we would be increasing taxes in order to slow down consumption. But if you understand it for one side, you should be able to go back and do it for the other side. But remember, whenever we're looking at expansionary policy, there are two different numbers that we need to come up with: the basic spending multiplier for government spending and the tax multiplier, because it would be either of those that the government could use to fix any problem with aggregate demand.